Well, welcome. Tonight, we're going to talk about something that was an eye opener for me when we did part one. How many families here in Milford, at the center of the universe, are affected by violence, by need? Um, there's a lot of topics we read about. How many families suffer from not having enough money to buy food, to buy clothing, to take care of the real basic essentials. And you read about it. And then it comes home, where you'll meet Marcia again tonight, who absolutely shocked me on part one of this show when she said what we were talking about affected 125 families here in Milford. It really becomes sobering because it's no longer a statistic. It's no longer something I read about. Could be people in my neighborhood, my old neighborhood, any neighborhood in Milford. So I'm sorry that it's not going to be pleasant when we have to realize that everything in Milford is not what we want it to be. But I'm happy if we discuss it, because many times the first step in fixing an issue is to recognize it, discuss it, and then come up with solutions. And tonight, I want to introduce two people who are solution makers and solution developers. So why don't we start with introductions?
Okay, so I'm Marcia Szymanski, and I'm the Executive Director of New Hope. We have an office here in Milford, and we have an advocate in the Milford Court. And Al, thanks for having us back. Really appreciate it.
Colleen?
I'm Colleen Hughes-Paterno. I am a licensed school psychologist, and I served on the board of directors of New Hope for several years. I've been off now for a couple of years, but I'm very familiar with the agency.
Let's start with what is New Hope. Marcia, give us a thumbnail view.
Sure. So New Hope is a not-for-profit organization, and we work with survivors of domestic and sexual assault. So we basically support them in whatever needs they bring when they reach out to us. We have a 24/7 hotline. We have domestic violence shelters. We have counselors and advocates that provide support. We have advocates in the courts. We have an education program that works with schools and community groups. And we also have in Worcester a visitation center for non-custodial parents to have safe and secure visits with their children. And then finally, we work with those who commit violence in an intimate relationships and really try to help them understand the nature of how they came to this belief system, and to try to help them learn how to develop new skills and new attitudes about what it means to be in a healthy relationship. So that's kind of the thumbnail sketch. And we serve 41 cities and towns, of which Milford is one of our key communities. And we probably serve over 5,000 families a year, and then probably reach another 15,000 folks through our educational programs.
Now, Marcia, it's been a couple weeks.
Mm-hmm.
Have you changed your mind and there was a mistake when you said 125 Milford families have suffered from abuse?
No, I wish that were not true, Al. I certainly do. And I just want to say, not to sort of make it worse, but those are the families who came forward. We know that there are many, many families who don't come forward. There's a lot of shame. There's a lot of, feeling that people won't believe me, or it's going to break up my family. Shame is a big thing. And then sometimes people are afraid of, reaching out to law enforcement, because if the person who's perpetrating the abuse gets arrested, they could lose their income. DCF could get involved. So the 125 is really just the tip of the iceberg, I would say.
Well, that iceberg feels like Titanic size.
I can understand it. One family is one too many.
Now, Colleen, when we think about the effects on children, I'm glad that Marcia brings it out as violence on children. Because I still, and I know I'm probably wrong in saying it, don't believe there's sexual anything with kids. That's a sickness, that's something, but you can't tell me that there is any kind of sexual relationship with a child. That to me is just a sickness, a violent sickness, but it happens even here in Milford. Talk to us about what the children go through.
So I think,
Well, wait a minute. Why don't we start with education? Before we get into that, why don't we start with, talk to me about this whole effect on a child's education.
so anytime that there's violence in the home or any kind of sense of threat, if a child feels threatened themselves, or if they're seeing that their caretaker is being threatened or harmed, then it's going to cause some form of traumatic reaction or trauma to their ability to process information. So then they go off to school. Maybe mom and dad have had a huge fight, or their caretakers have had a fight. There's been some form of violence that has taken place, and then they're off to school and attempting to learn. The impact that it has now on their ability to focus in school is really quite evident. They're not able to attend to what's being said. They're not going to be able to process the information in the same way that they would had they gotten a good night's sleep. Trauma is very negatively impacts the learning. But let me just hear more from you. Sorry, of what you.
Well, no. I mean, it's hard to think what a child must go through. I mean, when we went to school, I mean, you had the social pressures of trying to fit in with all the kids around you. Am I wearing the right clothes? Am I saying the right things? The normal stuff that I don't want to say typical kids go through. I don't know if that's the right word, but layer on top of that, that I'm worried my mom was going to get hit or my dad was going to get hit by my other parent. How do they cope? How would you know?
How would you know?
You're a school psychologist. You are trained to identify. I would think the first thing is you got to somehow figure out that there's a problem. Do these kids come to you in general, or do you have to figure it out first for them?
So that's a very good question, and I think that's what's very challenging is that the children that come forward, then it's sort of like what Marcia was saying earlier. That those are the families that have come forward and are getting the help. You don't necessarily know what child is experiencing violence in their home unless they tell you something. And so children often speak in their behaviors. So there's some behaviors that occur that don't say just, oh, this is domestic violence, but we have to keep in mind that behaviors are trying to tell a story. So we always have to remember that just because someone is behaving in a way that's unexpected, maybe they're doing something against the social rules, but they're not necessarily doing it intentionally or because they're strictly being behavioral, but they may be trying to share information about what they're struggling with. Children that have been traumatized are going to have traumatic responses. They may be triggered very easily by something that would ordinarily not be upsetting to somebody else. They may have a really hard time regulating some of their emotions and their behavior. That ability to regulate, meaning sort of manage the emotions, manage strong emotions that are coming in, and then manage our behavior or our reaction to those emotions. That is what helps us to be able to cognitively focus ourselves. So without being able to manage those emotions, which a lot of children who have experienced trauma are not going to be able to do, or they are going to have a more difficult time doing, then that just has this sort of ripple effect on their whole school experience. So how do we know? Well, we we don't necessarily know. That's the hard thing. But we have to remember that we trust that behavior it has a purpose. It's telling us something. We trust that, emotional responses are meaningful, and we need to pay attention to them. We also have to keep in mind that it doesn't necessarily, the children can have these experiences. They can have a hard time managing emotions or managing their behavior, and it not be because of domestic violence. So that's where you have to do a little bit of probing and building relationships. Schools are really good now, I think, about building relationships and the importance of having relationships with children, so that children will share information with them as they begin to trust a trusting adult.
But how do you figure when you start thinking about normal teenage behavior? I mean, when my oldest daughter hit junior year in high school, my darling bride would be so mean to her. She'd walk in the house and say, "Hi." And my daughter would explode. "What do you mean by that?" It's like, I remember looking at my wife saying, "How could you say something like hi?" And you're sitting there saying, okay, she can't win. I mean, I copped the fact that I was the father, so the girls always stuck by me. But anything my darling bride would do, and I mean, literally, "How was your day? Why do you need to know?" How do you sort the wheat from the chaff? I mean, she's being a normal teenager.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, 2 years later, I thought she was possessed. I came home on a Saturday night. She and my darling bride are sitting at the kitchen table, and I looked at Alexis and said, "Who are you and what alien took over your body?" And she said, "What do you mean?" I said, "It's Saturday night. You're playing boggle with your mother." She went to college. She came back. The two of them are best friends. I can't even begin to understand what changed.
Mm-hmm.
But how do you figure that, okay, they're going through the normal, I don't know if you call it the growing phase or the emotional phase of dealing with being a teenager versus somebody that has real problems at home?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and again, it's about relationship, and certainly during adolescence, teenagers often are trying to differentiate themselves from their parents. So they're not, no matter how much a parent tries to keep that relationship, they may not be able to the same level if their teenager is going to come and talk to them. And that certainly is true. But the parent can have keep a relationship with the school and with their teachers, right? So if they know that their child has a nice relationship with a teacher, the parent can kind of use that as an avenue, like, hey, is everything going okay? But you do need to look for things. You need to be looking for, a slippage in grades, a lack of interest in the things that they were typically interested in, isolation, really not, maybe distancing themselves from their peers, things like that, a change in mood or frequent change in moods. Those are some real telltale signs that something's up, and you might want to start asking some direct questions on how they're doing and really looking into that.
But who's asking the questions, Colleen? Is it the parents? Is it the school staff?
So you were talking about the relationship between a parent and a teenager. So then in that case, that would have been a parent could be beginning to ask. But if school is seeing that, then yes, the school will start. Schools have, school adjustment counselors. Teachers can refer a student if they're concerned with them to a school adjustment counselor. But again, you're bringing it back to that relationship and being able to have someone that they can trust, that they can turn to and have those kinds of conversations with. But sometimes just a real direct conversation, are you safe at home? What is home like? If you have good relationship with a teen, to be able to ask that question to them. I mean, anyone should be able to, even a neighbor, if they're worried about a person in their home, you can say, are you feeling safe? And if they're safe with you, they may be able to share that information with you. But I think one of the greatest things to begin with, and what I like so much about New Hope is that it gets communities talking about it. So it doesn't become such an awkward conversation or such an, you know, a sudden like, whoa, I have to trust you. But if we begin to have these conversations about, you know, how is, you know, not necessarily about how's everything going on in your home, but just talking about relationships and the complexities to relationships. Relationships are not easy, and we don't all necessarily have the skills to problem solve certain relationship dynamics, and that's okay. And we can start having those conversations and being that this is okay to be learning, and not always know how to handle something, and you know, especially if it's about power and control. And that's really what it comes down to with some, you know, particularly severe domestic violence, is this desire for power and control outside of ourselves. And of course, we can only control ourselves. So anytime someone is seeking to have control by seeking outside of themselves, it's never going to feel satisfying. It's never going to be fulfilling, which is why domestic violence increases and increases in time, because they never get that sense that what they're looking for is to have control within themselves, that internal control. You can't get that from trying to control somebody else. So having, you know, just communities starting to feel comfortable with having conversations about domestic violence and having conversations about safe dating, you know, so with teens, you know, dating violence, you know, and power and control in those relationships. Kids don't necessarily understand how to be in relationship with one another. So to have that open conversation that let's talk about this, and let's talk about how to build a healthy relationship and enter into a healthy relationship. I think that's one of the things that New Hope does, is it allows these conversations to be normal.
But how do you approach it? I mean, I was fortunate that when my daughters turned 6, I started coaching them in soccer. We were together about 41 weeks, 3 times a week of the year. So except for about 2.5 summer months, I had my 16 girls, most of them from when they were 6 to when they were high school freshmen. And we were very, very close. But yet it was tough to have those kind of conversations. You know, I remember one time, one of my girls came off the pitch and her face was red. She was upset. And I said, "What's wrong?" She goes, "Nothing."
Mhm.
And I was like, "Honey," and finally I said, "Look, if you don't tell me, we're done. This game is over. If something happened out there that's got you this upset." And she told me, we were in a boys' league and one of the other boys grabbed her breast. Now, I'm an old man surrounded by 16 daughters. You know, only one of them is my daughter.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't know what to say. You know, it was hard to open up, you know, that conversation, to pull the girls aside and say, "Now listen, you know that it's not my place to tell you when you make that decision. But one thing I'll tell you is nobody should ever touch you unless you want to be touched.
Mm-hmm.
And if it's up to me, that's when you turn 30. But it was a serious conversation, because it was the first time that some of these girls had to face a horrible scenario in a game they loved.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and I don't know that I handled it right or wrong, but I know that the boy who did it got a hip check and a body slam by my 2 defense girls the next time. And I had to tell him, hitting back is not the right thing.
Mm-hmm.
But inside of me, I got to tell you, I didn't feel sorry for him.
Mm-hmm.
So how do you open that? You know, you say we ought to have the community having the conversation. I opened it because it was thrown at me.
Yeah.
But for those people out there coaching, teaching, how do you even, I mean, I'm scared to death because I'm not trained. You know, I was doing the best I could with girls I loved.
Mm-hmm.
How do you open that conversation, not even in a neighborhood or community, but even in a classroom of 25 kids?
Mm-hmm.
I think sometimes, oh, go ahead, Colleen.
No, that's okay, Marcia, go ahead.
I was just going to say, well, first off, I appreciate you sharing that story, Al, because I think that is one of the hard things that sometimes we talk a lot about bystander intervention and what can you say or do. And I think that is one of the things that New Hope does offer trainings around. So, and sometimes it's just, if you're out and you hear people telling really racist or sexist jokes or demean women or demean someone's body, to just say, look, that's not funny. I don't appreciate that. That's not acceptable language here in Milford or in this community or whatever, so just really being able to, speak out on those things. I think that gets the message out. And then I think people begin to see, if you're able to do that, people begin to see you as, or I'm saying the metaphorical you, as someone who's safe and trusting and that they can then go to, that they have an advocate, so to speak. And I think just having this show is a way to start the conversation in the community. But Colleen, you were going to say a little more?
I actually was also going to thank you for sharing that story, because I do think that that's the situation that people do find themselves in, and they're not sure how to handle it. I think when any teenager tells you, nothing, and they kind of storm off, I think, it's important to kind of, let them know that you're there, and just, sharing with them, that you want to hear clearly, you look upset to me today, and I'm sorry that you're this upset. I'm here for you. Whenever you're ready to talk. I mean, in your case, your daughter did share that with you. But that I think would be the first response to a reaction like that. If you're, would be to just sort of validate the moment and reassure them that you're there when they're ready. So when they do come back, yeah, you can have that conversation and have that open conversation with them. I think it sounds like what you're trying to get at, though, is, before that sudden, sort of it blindsides you, what kind of
I got it thrown in my face, Colleen. I had to deal with it
right
on
there
the soccer pitch.
Right.
But from what you're saying, I would have been much happier if somebody had told me something like this could come up. Here are some ways of dealing with it. Because I was in shock. Somebody would touch one of my girls.
Right.
I did the best I could, but I'm not sure I did the right thing.
Yeah. I think you have to address it openly, and you have to address it directly, and you can have a conversation with just the team itself. Has this happened to anyone else? Has anyone else had this experience? And begin to find out how common is this. It may have been occurring more. Girls, a lot of teens have had some pretty significant experiences of sexual harassment at best, and also some the inappropriate touching, the assaults, and that might surprise a lot of people of how many teenagers have had those experiences and aren't sharing it with others. So I think it really does begin with before, is just being able to say, I'm open to having these conversations, and just even the adult having them, like sharing that, these things happen sometimes. I would want you all to tell me, I've heard that if it's a coach, I am aware that these are experiences that some people have on teams. And I want you all to know that I want you to let me know if that ever were to occur to you, that isn't appropriate, and you review it beforehand. This is not appropriate. We know, your body is your body. No one should be touching it. And please let me know if this were to happen, so that you're inviting them. You're welcoming that conversation before the experience occurs.
And it's funny because I guess I grew up as the team doormat. I was just always there. Ever since I was 6 years old, we were together all the time. So little things that you don't even think about. Standing in another game when one of my girls came up to me and said, "Mr. C, can I have your keys?" And I said, "Sure, honey, here." And her father looked at me and said, "Why is my 12-year-old asking for the keys to your car?" I said, "Well, got her period. She's going to want a tampon out of the glove compartment. The look on this man's face, and it didn't even dawn on me. You know, in the beginning of the season where I said, okay, girls, you're going to learn this thing called probability, which says 25% of you are going to have your period every week. And I'm tired of going into the CVS on the way to every game, because now I got to let all the kids know that Sally is in need of a tampon or something. So I said, my glove compartment's going to be emptied. Put your flavor in there. Anytime you need them, go for them. And it was just now a non-issue. The kids just come up to me, grab my car keys, go to the car, and we never had to discuss it again. But again, how do you open that conversation? I got it thrown at me because I got tired of stopping every single game on the way there, on the way back at a CVS or somewhere. I'm not sure it was the right thing, but it seemed to put everybody at ease.
Sounds like you did the right thing, Al. I think, you know, you just normalize it. This is something that happens and here it is. And I'm going to just put a supply here in the glove compartment and you just, you know, take what you need. I think you handled it really well. I do want to go back to saying that, you know, we've been focusing a lot on the girls' sports teams, but I think that it's really important that whoever is coaching the boys needs to also, I mean, that's where it starts, is to really start with the boys. I mean, the girls are, you know, really, you know, bearing the brunt of it. But, you know, we have to say, you know, it's kind of like when they say, well, why doesn't someone leave? To me, the question is, why is someone abusing someone else? So it really has to start with the boys and really coaching the coaches of the boys' leagues to say, this is unacceptable. You cannot do this. This is not allowed on a sports team or anywhere, but, you know, really focusing on that issue as well.
Well, it's hard because I remember the language issue came up. You know, as kids hit the teenage years, they want to show they're adults by using bad language. And everybody on the team, I actually had one parent come up to me once and say, are you really offended by the word butt? Because I wouldn't let my girls use it. They fell on their bum. And I looked at them, I said, candidly, no. But if they think butt bothers me, they're never going to use anything more colorful. You know, but again, I didn't know if I was doing the right thing. It just seemed to work. My girls never swore in front of me. They showed respect to the adults because I told them. I said, using that kind of language is embarrassing to me and to your team. But again, we're talking about what I consider minor things, you know, that a girl would use the word butt or a more colorful word. I'm scared to death that I overlooked somebody having a lot larger of an issue at home that I never knew.
And I would imagine there's a, you know, we're hearing so much now, and thankfully we are having more conversations now, and this is something that makes, you know, that people are aware of more. So I would imagine that there are people looking back and saying, geez, did I miss something? But I don't think that's the purpose of why we're moving forward in the direction of having these kinds of conversations. It's not because anyone's looking back and thinking, oh, what they did wrong, or all the would have, could have, should have. I mean, we can all do that. But it's more about what we're doing right now in this moment, and being able to address things with boys, as Marcia was saying, about relationships and how to be, how to problem solve in relationships, how to act in a relationship, what is appropriate touching, what is very inappropriate touching and shouldn't be happening, or what's in that gray area, and how do you kind of navigate. That has to happen with both, you know, genders. I think also we need to keep in mind, so we need to definitely educating those who could potentially, or are more prone, or I guess it's been more socially acceptable for you know, boys to be the aggressors or something, and so really kind of addressing it with boys directly, that this is not appropriate behavior, or what is appropriate behavior, but also bearing in mind that boys are sometimes the victim as well. It isn't just girls, you know, that, and that's, you know, that's a very hard person then to come forward if they believe that, you know, somehow there's still these gender roles or whatever are in place, that they now have to come, you know, jump over that hurdle in order to get the help they need. So we have to kind of be sure that we understand that boys are also at risk of being violated, and they need help as well. They need a lot of help. They need a lot of support, and they need to know that they didn't cause it, they didn't bring it on, and there's no shame to be placed on them. It's very important.
Well, that whole shame, you know, and I was stunned when, again, I was told the story of a woman who was being abused physically by her partner or husband, whatever the animal should be called. I'm sorry, I just have no sense of sympathy for anybody who beats up on kids or partners. Just, I have a hard time, and I apologize. But she said something that stunned me. And she said, the reason I let him hit me is that if he doesn't hit me, he'll hit my kids. And I sat there shaking my head saying, my God, who could ever fault a mother for protecting her offspring? You know, in her way, maybe it's not the right thing to stick to it, but she was keeping her children from being hit. Again, if you're not a trained professional, how do you even open that door? Should you open that door? Because I was always scared to death when the girls put me in these weird situations that I was going to say something wrong.
So certainly if someone were to share that information with you, you would want to give them a hotline number. You would want to get them professional help. That's beyond what any, you know, neighbor or some, you know, a caring person can be there for them if they can counsel.
I'd call, you know, it's simple. Pick up the phone, call Mike Paghetti, the police chief, and said, Michael, I got a problem I heard about. I don't know how to handle it.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and I'm sure he's been trained, he'd know how to handle it or refer the people to somebody. But what do you do when you suspect it? How do you even have the conversations to open the doors to finding out?
I think some of what Colleen said is really going back to that, asking people if they feel safe at home. Is there anything, you know, that they're concerned about? I think just letting people know that you're willing to listen, that you believe them. If someone does disclose something, it's really important just to let people know you believe what they say. And just, you know, not being afraid to ask, even if they say, no, everything's fine, which they may do, because oftentimes, again, the shame, people don't want to disclose. But I think if they, you know, to just say, well, you know, if you need anything, I'm here for you, you know, anytime, you know, you can call me, pick up the phone, text me. You know, I'm worried about you. I'm concerned about you. You know, you don't seem yourself, or, you know, it seems like you've withdrawn from the neighborhood. We used to see you around a lot. Now we don't see you so much. I'm just, you know, I just want to make sure you're okay. You know, that kind of thing. Just, you know, and then I think what Colleen said too, you know, when the situation is really physically, precarious to pick up the phone. I mean, people can always call New Hope as well. I know you're going to show the hotline number at the end. You know, those are the kinds of calls we get often from people who say, I'm worried about someone who I think is in an abusive relationship and I don't know what to do. You know, we have trained people answering the hotline.
But wouldn't you be scared, Marcia, if I think, I don't know, but I think there's a possibility that a neighbor or friend, you know, somebody, if I call and I'm wrong,
well, if you just say, hey, I'm worried about you, I'm concerned, I'm wondering if you're okay. If they say, no, I'm fine, you know, I've just been under the weather or whatever, you know. I mean, what does it hurt to be wrong? If you're wrong about saying to someone that you care about them, is that, you know?
Well, I mean, visions of child services swooping in and breaking up the family because I thought Colleen was having a problem and she wasn't.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's a scary thought on my part.
Mm.
I mean, do I call somebody like Colleen who's trained and say, look, I have no idea, but I'm worried, and just leave it up to her trained hands?
Mm-hmm.
Is that what we should do?
It's hard to know that idea of when you pick up the phone to call. I mean, someone like Colleen is and certainly with New Hope, we're mandated reporters, but I'm going to let Colleen answer that question.
Of when to call someone else and let them know. I think anytime your worry has escalated to a level that you're questioning whether you should call someone, you probably should. You should probably you can always call. I mean, certainly calling New Hope to say this is what I'm worried about, and talking it out with one of their hotline counselors is probably going to, is going to help, tease out what the situation is and what, the severity of it. It's not going to necessarily result in a call to DCF or something, if that's the concern. But certainly, if children are in danger, I mean, that's what DCF is for. They're not there to help invade or break up a family. That's not the purpose of DCF. Is there to protect children, and they'll work with families too. So there's, not that I think people should be running off calling DCF on their neighbors, that necessarily is a good idea either. But I think there's that piece too of like, there's some services that are in place to actually to help families and to protect children, and they're needed services. So we can kind of try to dismantle the fear there. If the children are in danger, children need to be supported. We need to put them first. But again, I do think though we kind of do have to get down to just normalizing these conversations so that it doesn't feel like we're invading, invading privacy by just simply asking, hey, how are you doing? Are you safe? It shouldn't feel like we're overstepping. We're not walking into someone's house and setting up a camera to see what's happening. We're just simply asking them, how are you doing? That should feel normal. And the more we get into just having conversations and being honest about that, relationships are hard. And if you're in a difficult relationship, it's not something to be ashamed of. These things are tricky things, and we really haven't been taught how to be in relationship. We're just kind of learning to have more kind of direct instruction around that. It isn't something that we really thought we had to until recently. We know that relationships are very challenging. They're very complex, and we need to be able to talk about them without feeling any kind of shame and without putting shame onto other people. Maybe this sort of shock and awe if someone is to share with us that they're in an abusive relationship. Maybe we need to mute that a little bit, because that might turn a person off, and that might make them think, okay, well, I guess there's something really awful and wrong with my situation. But we need to just guiding them. And I think guidance, maybe that's the best term. You want to just keep guiding someone carefully and lovingly, if you know them well enough, to be very compassionate, but not judgmental, as you kind of guide them to the right support.
Well, I mean, it's also, I remember one time my darling bride and I took my daughter to the pediatrician, and we looked at each other, and the same thought went through her mind as mine. Oh my God, this child looks like she's been beaten up. My daughter was a very aggressive soccer player. So her legs had bruises and bumps and scratches. And I'm looking at my daughter, and it's like, first of all, you feel the pain that, oh my God, did I let this happen? But then I looked and just stared at my wife, and you could see both of us thinking the same thing. If he's going to think I'm abusing my daughter with all these bumps and bruises. And I asked him, and he said, no, we can tell.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm glad I asked the question, but he said he can tell, I guess through experience, when it's normal soccer bumps and bruises or sports bumps and bruises?
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of training that goes into that too, and not only that, I think we talked about last time, even, people going to the dentist and trying to do some training with dentists, because oftentimes people have dental issues as a result of abuse. And so sometimes that's where things get picked up. But I would say too, with COVID, this is a really, because people are isolating and they are stressed and they are feeling, more pressure, that if people are concerned about someone, to pick up the phone and call them and just check in with your neighbor, check in with your friends, family members, particularly if you maybe suspect that there may be some abuse going on. Now's the time, because you have a perfect excuse. I'm calling about COVID just to kind of see how you're doing, and, want to know that if you need anything, I'm here.
Are we asking too much of our educators? I mean, when I was a kid, my parents sent me to school and expected the teachers to be educating me. Too many of these kids now, we're also expecting the teachers to raise them. Are we layering on another expectation on the teachers that may or not be fair?
I'm not sure I know how to answer that. Is there a lot put on educators? Absolutely. There certainly is. Do children deserve a lot? Yeah, I think they do. So it's it's how supportive we are of the entire schools. I think that's what it comes down to. Are we all, as a community, are we willing to provide those supports? Are we willing to support the schools as these demands are placed on them? Certainly, children are worthy of having a lot of support around them. A lot of people in their lives that are caring people, and parents are deserving of that. Children are not raised in a vacuum. It's not just their parents who influence their lives. So as many supports in the community that can surround our children and youth, the better we will all be. And so, yes, are we asking a lot of educators? Yeah, I think we do. I think as long as our communities are willing to support the educators in all that we do, then I think then we're all providing for the children and their families in the best that we can.
Now I'm going to put you on a terrible spot. I see the title school psychologist. Are we doing enough to support the kids in our schools? I know we can always do more.
Mm-hmm.
Let's face it, no matter what you do, you can always do more and be a little better.
Yeah.
But is the town of Milford, and I apologize because I care about my 4,400 kids. When we talk about town government and all, I got 4,400 kids to worry about. There's somebody next door in other towns supposed to be worrying about theirs. Are we doing enough for our 4,400?
I can't answer it completely. I can tell you that I think Milford does an outstanding job in caring for students and families. I think I really think you've got some outstanding people at the helm. I think you have and throughout the whole district of just people who want to have that relationship with families and with their students, and really providing everything they can for them, not just education, but all in the social emotional realm as well. So you're doing okay. Can we use more support? Certainly.
Sure. Well, I mean, we've gotten a lot of criticism, not a lot, but a substantial amount, about how we fund special needs programs, because we tend to have a stronger special needs program than a lot of towns around us, which draws kids in. And I've had people come up to me and accuse me of being too soft when I vote on the finance committee and allowing kids from other towns to come in. And I know I've taken a very strong position saying, the special needs kids, in my mind, are no more special, but no less special than the other 4,400. And if on the way to supporting our 4,400, we happen to help some kids from other towns, I don't see anything wrong with that. But I'm not an educator. I'm playing straight on emotion that I coached a lot of these special needs kids, and I've never seen a group so appreciative. And that was their parents too.
Mhm.
You know, that anything you did for them, if they weren't doing what you asked them to, it wasn't because they were defiant. They just didn't understand. But are we doing enough for these kids? Are we doing too much? I don't think it can be too much, but I'll let you answer that.
I just try to. I don't
But are
know
there
if I
any-
can answer anything.
Well,
with
I think one of the things,
we typically try and take care of their everyday needs. Are there specific things, like you said something tonight that's really put a bug in my ear about, you got to open up. You got to teach the whole village how to have an open discussion. Not that I want to have them, because I'm not qualified, but I want to know how to identify a potential problem and turn it over to a Colleen, who then can help that child. Are there things we should, when I ask you, are there things we should be doing? Does anything come to mind?
In the community?
In the community, in the schools?
I mean, I think parents have an important role to play in that, in terms of just, if you have, you can have meetings with parents. One of the problems is it's hard to get parents. Oftentimes they're working a few jobs, they've got other kids, it's hard to get people together. But there's a role for churches and faith communities. There's a role for parents and parent organizations, other community groups, physicians groups, medical providers, businesses. I mean, we've gone into some businesses and done trainings for some of the businesses around, how do you support your employees who may have domestic violence issues. Certainly sports leagues is another place where, which we've talked a lot about tonight. And obviously working with young people is one way to really try to prevent the cycle from continuing. So I think there's lots of places where these conversations can happen.
Well, I think Colleen brought something up important, which we can try and address it from one angle. The people who are the victims of inappropriate touching or inappropriate pressure.
Mm-hmm.
But you also have to work it the other way.
Absolutely.
To sit there and say, hey guys, I mean, when the kids turned 15, I put the girls and the boys together on a soccer team. We played in the boys league, as I mentioned. Well, every Friday or Saturday night, I took them all out and we all went out to dinner. And it was funny because after a while, we started seeing more and more kids show up. I mean, all of a sudden I got 20 kids. I got 16 plus another 20 to feed. But it was kind of nice because the boys had a different sense. The girls always knew the parents were there. They were used to us, my girls. They knew that I'd take them on a Friday night, all of them to a movie. If not that, we'd go out to dinner. And then when we put them together with the boys, I'll never forget, we went out to, I think it was Papa Gino's, because with 30 some, I'm not paying for Applebee's for everybody. And one of the mothers was leaving. And I asked her, I said, where are you going? She goes, well, I got to go home. I said, why? Oh, her son, she goes, oh, he would be embarrassed if I stayed here. So I called him over. And I said, you like playing soccer? He goes, I love it, Mr. C. I said, you like playing for me? He goes, yeah. I said, well, let me give you a hint. If your mother isn't invited to stay, you aren't either. And it was funny because you could see the first night when the boys had their moms, because they would go over that side, we'd be over this side, but they were nervous until they found out it wasn't uncool to have your parents with you. And after that, I don't think most of the parents ever complained again. They all showed up and we had a night with the kids. So, again, it's a silly thing, but that was one way of letting the boys know that, hey, it's okay to have your parents around. And they all behave very well, because anybody who didn't, I never had to say a word, because you'd get a couple kids that get a little rowdy, and the kids on the team would pull them aside and tell them, hey, you better knock that off, because if you don't, you're going to ruin it for all of us. So, again, silly things like that, just setting an example, I guess, it has to make it a little easier for the kids then to assimilate and accept acceptable behavior.
That's a great example, Al, because it just shows the power of building a culture where certain norms are and behaviors are accepted and not. And it sounds like with the sports teams that you were involved with, you set a tone that said these are the behaviors that are acceptable, and then the other kids could put pressure on certain kids to behave. I mean, I think that's what we try to create in our society. How do we create social norms that people will follow that say violence is not acceptable? And so in some ways you have this little microcosm of what I think we need to create in a larger macro sense. So
well,
it's
and
a great example.
The girls really got it, because there was one time when a group of my girls came up and said, one of my other girls, I don't want to use any names, was starting to hang out with some less than desirable kids.
Mm-hmm.
And they were into drugs and things on that line. And I asked the girls, I said, well, she's one of our family. What are you going to do to help her? And apparently 4 or 5 of them started hanging with her whenever the other kids came back. And they didn't like that the typical kids were always hanging out with her. So it helped her kind of wean herself away from it. I was really proud of them, because they saw a family member in trouble. It was our little soccer family, but and they took it upon themselves. But again, how do you set something like that up? I had 9 years, 8 years with them, all the time. We even went on vacations together.
Mm-hmm.
So we really did become kind of a family. But there's so many other kids, I really believe, that could benefit from peer help or peer assistance.
Mm-hmm.
Where do you start, Colleen?
In building peer supports?
Yes.
I think that that there are some peer groups, and you kind of were talking about creating one right then. And I think there are all kinds of opportunities whenever you have peers and groups that you create that culture, as Marcia was saying, that is supportive like that. I think just trying to get back to like with the boys, something you had said kind of got me thinking about them again, just not wanting to, send the message that any, boys who have done something wrong are necessarily monsters. I think that they need education, or they need learning and modeling of how to be in a healthy relationship and actions to take and not to take. But you can create those kinds of cultures in team sports or clubs, or however way you have kids gathering together. It can be at the teenage level. It just seems that we've kind of focused on it quite a bit tonight, or it can be at the younger level, just helping kids understand through modeling and still having conversations or having stories and that are about healthy relationships, and even just direct instruction of how to, and things to do and things not to do, so that it becomes clearer, because we do want the boundaries to be clear. When someone says no to something, they mean no, and then that's that. When someone says something is hurting them, then it's not funny anymore, it's hurting them, you stop. There are certain boundaries that we want very clear. So you can have conversations like that, you can build a community like that understands, and then that they're going out and actually kind of monitoring and helping others as well to do the same. I mean, that's really what education is all about, is like, I'm going to learn from myself, and then I'm going to share with others what I've learned. And it sounds like that's what you were doing. It sounds, certainly what Marcia was saying was was the most ideal situation for communities to build that kind of culture.
Now, are there programs available? I mean, today's day and age, two parent working families, I would think is more the norm than the exception. So you get home, by the time you get through dinner, do any things around the house, you don't really have time to go out to meetings. But are there programs at the high school or the middle school that parents should be made aware of to say, when you get a chance, flip your iPad open and watch this program or this series? Is there anything like that available?
I don't know. I can't speak to that at those levels. I don't work at those levels. And so, but the websites have everything on it. I would encourage people, or if they have questions, to ask someone at those school levels. But certainly, usually the websites have pretty much everything on it that a parent, if there's any information of clubs or things for parents.
Yeah. DPH, the Department of Public Health, has a website called Respectfully, and it's really geared towards youth. It's created by youth for youth, and they have a lot of really short little videos and vignettes for youth that really talk about how to have healthy relationships, and that's a great resource for young people. You know, we've been in some of the schools over the years. We've been in the Milford school systems off and on. I don't know that there's anything specifically like what you've just referred to, but I certainly could provide a list of websites and resources that parents could utilize for sure.
That would be great.
Mm-hmm.
Any last words? As always, it always seems like at the beginning of the show, it's like, how am I going to talk for 58 minutes? And then here we are at the end. Any last words?
I'm just grateful for you to invite us, Al. This has been really wonderful. I really appreciate, because you are starting the conversation.
Right.
Well, thank you for everything both of you do in your organizations. Colleen, just keep plugging. We need all the help we can get. And Marcia, I think the biggest thing you did is open up our eyes.
Well,
Because
thank you.
before talking to you, I would have said, yeah, there could be one or two families in Milford that need help. Then I find out there's 125 identified families, which just it's just emotional. Never think it happens in your own little town.
Well, they're lucky to have you to bring this forward, Al. So thank you.
Thank you. And as always, as we come to the end of the show, takeaway message: if you have a question, you'll see New Hope. Just call, just ask. When you go to the school, if you have concerns, when you talk to the guidance counselors about everything, just ask. These people are there for your kids. They're there for you. They're there for the town of Milford. And they're amazing people, how much they actually do. So thank you to our 6 loyal viewers for tuning in. And as always, may tomorrow night be a better night than tonight. God bless, and thanks for listening to us.
Not too long since I've been home. Been running all my life